I am going to present to you a wonderful exploration of the Mimbres culture and the pottery they produced from about 200 Common Era to 1150 Common Era, when all traces of the Mimbres culture disappeared. So as I show you this slide presentation, which is from an internet source, I will be reading everything on the screen, and that is an accessibility issue. Some people may have difficulty reading, and so by saying it out loud, then the closed captioning will take care of it. Though now that I say that, it makes less sense to me. But anyway, it is. Okay, so well, this is the way things go here. So I guess what it means is that some people can't read those things because they have eyesight issues, so they can hear me reading them. So we'll start with this presentation on the Mimbres culture, and we start by saying the peaceful village dwellers who settled along the banks of the Mimbres River in southern New Mexico created some of the most enchanting painted pottery designs during their brief existence. And this is an example of a human-like image, quite humorous perhaps, and quite kind of free-spirited in its portrayal. This is from the third of the three periods of Mimbres pottery making, and you can tell that by the distinctive rims. The lines around the rim only happened in the third period. So using modern scientific dating methods, the culture that settled along the 46-mile banks of the Mimbres River in southern New Mexico apparently began about 200 Common Era. And you can see this red dot placing it right in the southern area there. To your left is Hohokam. You can see south, so that's the west is Hohokam. The Hohokam culture was living there. To the north, you can see the Mogollon and the Anasazi, and you can see Sonora located to the south. And so you get a sense of Casa Grandes slightly to the southeast, and you get a sense of where they were in all of this, where they were located. Then the entire culture did disappear without a trace around 1150 Common Era. Archaeologists generally group the Mimbres culture, the Anasazi to the north and the Hohokam to the west, into the Mogollon cultures. All three existed in this general area of New Mexico during the same period. The Apache are generally considered descendants of the Anasazi, and the Pueblo as descendants of the Hohokam. But there is no evidence of anything like Mimbres pottery in any of the subsequent cultures, and this makes this pottery and the culture that produced it even more unique. Here is an overhead view of the 5,000-foot elevation of the southwest high desert, and can produce blazing heat in the summer and snow in the winter. The Mimbres River drained a high and very fertile river valley surrounded by mountains. You can see we're in New Mexico, right just above the Mexican border. You see Arizona to the west. The Rio Grande, the Rio Grande was the source. The Mimbres flowed southeast into the Rio Grande River, which flows 1,800 miles from Colorado through New Mexico and Texas and into the Gulf of Mexico. It is in this fertile and relatively protected valley that the nomadic tribes settled and prospered. And since little else remains, it is primarily through their pottery we are able to learn anything about the Mimbres people. Now here's a timeline you can see running from the 200 Common Era origins of the Mimbres through the three periods of Mimbres to their disappearance at 1150 Common Era. And we'll show you some distinctions of the first, second, and third period, which are all distinctions created by the pottery. And you can also see here the Japanese. We're just going to show you some other things that were happening around the culture at this time. Japanese invented paper at 100 Common Era. Jesus was crucified 134 Common Era. The last gladiators battle in Rome was 404. Buddhism reaches Japan 538. King Arthur was killed in 587. Chinese invented porcelain in 650. Battle of Karbala in Iraq, 680. And the first Norse explorers to North America in 1000 Common Era. And then William the Conqueror was active from 1066 to 1087. Gives you a sense of when all this is occurring. During this time, the first groups began to establish permanent settlements along the Mimbres River. And the reason they settled there, as they began to settle in around 200 Common Era, was due to some very favorable conditions. Despite the 5,000-foot elevation, this river valley was somewhat temperate. And hunting in the surrounding mountains was plentiful. There was fish in the river, soils were fertile, and firewood was plenty. And of course, no other natural materials like clay were available. And here's an example of a house structure, a pit house, that was common during this first period from 200 to 550 Common Era. The population at that time, 4 to 5 villages with 500 or less inhabitants total. Like many cultures, the first pottery was simply made by hand without any tools, using the simple pinch pot method. Here's an example of that, much the way we will be making our raku tea bowls. Different culture, different time, different place. And like most other cultures, the Mimbres people made larger pots by using the coil method. And so we've been doing that with our African pots. And here are some examples from this first period up to 550 Common Era. And you can see they've already got tremendous control over the form. It's very symmetrical, looks pretty light. And also you can see some ornamentation efforts with some marks from the coil building and a large pot in the background. And then in the foreground, the darker pots have some kind of stippling or regulated texture patterning. The simple shapes, the red-brown natural clay appearance is produced by rubbing of iron oxide onto the surface of the pots before or after firing in fire pits. And then there were also some effigy jars which look like this. And here, this must be later in the first period because you can already see the introduction of a red slip to the pottery. Here are some pictures, not exactly, they're from the Hopi, not exactly the Mimbres peoples, but in that area, just to give you a sense of what the pottery making might have looked like. This is from 1900, which is what, 750 years after the disappearance of the Mimbres. Process of making pots would be the same throughout all of the periods and would be similar to that done all around the world. And this is something we're learning in this class, that pots are all around the world have been formed by hand by using coil, by using pinch, by using slab. All the techniques we're going to be using are ubiquitous to the human race on every continent. And I find that very unifying. It's very encouraging to be thinking about the common way that we all approached our early existence and the materials around us. Here is a photograph, again from 1900, of a Hopi doing some wonderful painting of slips on a pot. So the pots would be stacked in an open pit fire. Actually, it's pretty much an open field fire. And they would be placed perhaps on a bed of fuel, maybe on some kind of grate to suspend it, but definitely an open bed. And then they would be covered with either wood or, in this case, cattle or buffalo dung. That's what that pile is. So they would be fired with cow patties. And after the fuel would be added on perhaps during the firing for some time, wouldn't last probably more than 3 hours or so, temperatures reaching anywhere from 800 degrees to even up to 1100 degrees. So a very soft, low fire earthenware. And then when they died down, then the pots would be revealed. Second period, now we're moving from the early period to 550 to 900 Common Era. And this is in the second period, which is distinguished by the change in pottery more than anything else. Again, fascinating that pottery is our evidence of what was going on in this culture. So there's increased sophistication in the pottery, and including the making and use of distinctive bowl shapes that for archaeologists in our era define their civilization, because most of what we found has been the bowl shape, which we will be making in this class. The second period saw increased agriculture in the valley, less reliance on hunting of larger game animals in the mountains, and larger villages, and an increase in population perhaps to 1,000 to 1,500 people. So with increased agriculture, population can settle more and may have more time to develop skills like advanced pottery. And here is a look at some of their homes, what their homes might have looked like, or did look like. These are drawings. These are above ground homes rather than pit homes. And the villages got quite a bit larger, and clustered housing with up to 15 units were common. And if you see, again, we're looking at the second period of Mimbres pottery. We can see coil construction, and other shapes were made. More bowls have been recovered than anything else. And one style of brushwork included this radial geometric design. So the bowl is spun perhaps while the brush is applied, or it might have been just hand done, but the bowl would be turned as the slip is applied. And this again is the addition of white slip to the patterns. And this quadrant design is occurring now, and it becomes common, and over time becomes more and more precise and sophisticated. Red slip is added to the white slip, and we see that these quadrants may have had some religious meanings. For instance, the quadrant could refer to the four directions: north, south, east, and west. Here is another example of the common geometric patternings. This is a lovely kind of cascading egg shapes here. And you can also see, we're still in the second period, and you can see that this has a kill hole or spirit hole in the center of the bowl. And these were done when the bowls were put into burial, when they were buried with people who died. And the hole, many different theories about the hole. One possible concept was that in order to prevent trapping the spirit, a hole was punched into the bottom of the piece. During this period now, we're now moving to the third period. Now that's from 900 to 1150 Common Era, so the last 250 years of the Mimbres people. They reached a really highly developed form of expression. They really got more sophisticated in their geometric designs and making images of animals and man. Settlements grew in size and number to 16 villages with an estimated population of 2,500 people living among the 46-mile stretch of the Mimbres River. So at this early stage, we're now up to 5 times the original populations. They were largely self-sufficient, and virtually no evidence of trade exists. No evidence of their distinctive pottery is found among the ruins of either the Anasazi or the Hohokam cultures. So the Mimbres kept to themselves. They did not travel. Here is, you can see here, some third pottery, great geometric patterns. Perhaps there is some meaning to these symbols. But this is, you could say this is a quadrant design, but I would say it's more like a kind of mirrored design, bifurcated down the middle. And you can see here the border rim, which you will see from now on, the border rim, those fine lines right along the edge. And if you wish to try that, you can you can hold your brush steady while turning the pot steadily. Here's another geometric pattern here. And this is a kind of a 4-point pattern that you're looking at, quite a wonderful kind of swirling quality to it. And it's got some interesting issues. It's got the spirit hole, it's got the rim of the border. And here are some more pieces that are interesting to look at, again with the spirit hole. And J.J. Brody, a professor of art history at the University of New Mexico for over 30 years, and the leading authority on Mimbres pottery, says, the Mimbres often placed a pot over the head of the dead with a hole punched in the bottom, a killed pot. In death, one looks up through the hole in the killed pot, while most of one's life is spent looking down toward the ground. A duality perhaps is implied in this. So this is another theory about what the kill hole might, or the spirit hole might mean. Here's another great example of both a depiction of a man and a snake. And you can also see the rim is very heavily striped, which is typical of this third period of Mimbres pottery. And so the question is begged here, that what does the snake mean in this culture? What is the role of the snake? Is this a bird or an insect? I would bet insect, personally. And here you can see that this kind of, again, looks a little bit like it could be bird or insect. It does have a kind of, there was a lot of freedom of expression. It does have a lot of humor in those big old eyes and kind of almost eyebrow antennae there. And that kind of humor is found in contemporary Pueblo art to this day. Here is a bowl that can be viewed from two sides. Perhaps it was for greeting. Maybe it was a bowl for serving chicken. I'm thinking popcorn. But anyway, it's a lovely image of these almost quail-like birds perched on perhaps a sword. Here's a common hunting image. And you can see that it's not unusual for a human figure to be depicted as part animal. Here, the head seems to be that of a deer or a steer, or not a steer, a deer, or perhaps an antelope. Here's another geometric pattern, and this is an unusual example because instead of 4 points, it's a 3-point pattern. And there's an image of some birds, which were, there were a lot of different birds depicted. I think it would be fun to see if we can't generate some exciting bird imagery as well. So do your best. So over 7,000 pieces of Mimbres pottery have been saved. That's quite a bit. Nearly 80% of these have a distinctive flat bowl shape. And of course, this person has, the person who put this presentation together has some favorites, and I will show you a presentation of some that I found to be interesting as well. But here you can see a 4-point rabbit image of just the head of the rabbit. A couple of images of deer or antelope. Again, look at the prominence, the real dramatic rim lines that are typical of this third period. Here again, great rim lines, and another image of a deer. And this is such an intriguing piece. I don't know if this is meant to be for figures or if it's meant to be more of a floral pattern, but these heads going to the 4 directions again, maybe that's what this is about the 4 directions. See these little kind of turtle-like heads right there on the piece that are quite exciting. Here's another geometric pattern, the one we've looked at before. And just to take a closer look at that, you can see the these little squares with the dots in them, almost like snake eyes and dice, but I'm sure they didn't call them that. Here's a close-up of those. This looks like a bird wing, bird head kind of imagery, 2 birds kind of coming together. Look at these wonderful hummingbirds. 3-legged hummingbirds, I might add. So As far as the discovery of the Mimbres culture by the Western world, only in the late 1870s did word of the ancient settlement begin to reach museums and universities of the East Coast of the US. An amateur archaeologist named E.D. Osborne had been searching through the Mimbres area for years, and had eventually he discovered some shards and brought them back east to J. Walter Fuchs of the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. in 1910. And here's a photograph of Fuchs. He's best known for his archaeological discoveries on the prehistoric Southwest Mexico and West Indies while working with the Smithsonian's Bureau of American Ethnology. 1895 to 1828, quite the adventurer. Fuchs was intrigued by what he saw, and through the Smithsonian, he funded Cornelius and Harriet Cosgrove, who explored and dug in the Mimbres River Valley on 7 exhibitions through the mid-late 1920s. And here they are in this picture. They thought they'd found the entire culture at Stewart's ruins, so they ended their explorations. Also, the Great Depression had occurred. Unfortunately, while financing for exhibitions wasn't available during the Depression, there were many people out of work, and all were looking for ways to make money or to survive. During the 1930s, entire villages were destroyed by looters looking for highly saleable artifacts. As late as 1960, looters with bulldozers continued to search and destroy important sites until legislation was passed and severe penalties enforced to prohibit these thefts. See that bulldozer sitting in the middle of that site. Causes for the disappearance of the Mimbres culture, what led them to disappear in 1150? And no one knows for sure, but there are lots of possibilities. They could have overhunted the game in the area. The soil could have been depleted through extensive agriculture. They could have consumed all of the available local firewood. The population grew 15 times what it was during the first periods, and that would exacerbate all of the above. A 20-year long, widely documented period of drought throughout the Southwest just after 1100 Common Era could very much have led to their demise. Lack of trade and contact with other cultures of the same general period. They were isolated. They did not communicate and trade with other cultures. So here's a final quote from J.J. Brodie, the expert in Mimbres, and he says, Mimbres paintings can teach us much about greed, but above all, they teach us about art and the power that creative expression have to link together past, present, and future. And that's kind of an interesting insight, and very much an archaeologist's point of view, this frustration with the greed that fueled so much exploitation of the sites, digging up of artifacts for sale and for profit. But his point is primarily that these images are so inspiring, such precision and humor, and the quality of the images were so great to discover, and really do show us the quality of human nature and the human spirit and creativity and expressiveness all the way back in, as early as the 900 Common Era. These wonderful drawings and on these pots had begun. And so it's a great testament to the kind of renewable power of human creativity. Here's a final look at a wonderful Mimbres pot. Perhaps a turtle, perhaps some kind of horny toad. I will make an attempt here.